Welcome back to the next edition of Tea with Alan and Pete. Today, Alan is in our listening room at Hi-Fly Plus headquarters, and we're going to be talking about room treatment and room acoustics.
Hi there, yeah, and today, for once, I'm completely tea-free, so bear with me if I start to fall asleep. Yeah, pretty much one of the neglected parts, I believe, in audio is room acoustics. Now, we spend a great deal of money looking at great things like this. This is the Borenson BO1 Silver Supreme loudspeaker, a wonderful loudspeaker. Sounds good in any room, but it sounds an awful lot better when the room is correctly looked after. And essentially what we have, and there's some very expensive ways of doing this in terms of hiring an acoustician, having your room rebuilt from scratch. But in some respects, a slightly more pragmatic approach works surprisingly well. It's when when you get to the limits of that, you might want to look into more advanced systems, such as hiring an acoustician. But in essence, what we have is that any sound propagating element, be it my voice, be it the loudspeaker from this, will, when it in free air, will continue on until eventually those compressions and rarefactions of air that are sound are ultimately dissipated. In a living room or a listening room or a studio or wherever you want, that sound is going to, before it gets to that point where it's dissipated, it's going to hit a wall, it's going to hit a surface. And when it does hit a surface, one of three things happens. It's either absorbed, refracted, or reflected. This is the same with light, with any wave system, with any form of wave, with any form of wave. Why don't we just call it that? With reflection is probably the one we know the best. If you go into a bathroom that's a tiled bathroom, or you buy a new house and it's unfurnished, and you walk in there, that you hear your voice and you hear the reverberation, you hear it echoes. It sounds like this kind of springy, fluttery sound whenever you make a noise. And that's pure reflection. That's the sound bouncing off every hard surface, and it bounces off the wall and bounces off the ceiling and bounces off the floor and the wall. And that sound is sometimes useful. It's useful in creating a live sound. It's also fundamental to some parts of music. We wouldn't have rock and roll without Scotty Moore playing a bit of slapback echo on his guitar, or the same with almost with every guitar, rockabilly guitar of that time had that kind of very quick reverberant echo known as slapback. But in the house, that's something that can get a bit uncomfortable, because we actually want to listen to the loudspeakers as if they are instruments in a room, in a concert hall, or in a live space. So we don't want to have too much of the room introducing itself. Now, one of the other problems that we have, a unique problem in domestic rooms, is that if you look at the wavelength of some bass notes, it just happens to be roughly the same length as the length or the width or the height of the room. So you can get a point where essentially the room is joining in. The wavelength between the room is causing that sort of area to go. And that's why you get bass boosts. You get a boom in the room, sometimes used to be known as eigentones, which are it's effectively the bass, the sound of the room joining in with the bass. It likes the music so much it wants to join in. Now, when it comes to something like that, what we need to do is look at some kind of absorption. Now, this is in the worst possible place, one of the worst places for it, in the middle of the room. But this panel here is an absorber. This is a bass trap. This is made by a company called GIK. Other companies are available. You could probably even make your own if you know what you're doing, with some loft insulation or whatever. This acts to absorb certain low frequencies. It's a broad spectrum device, so it'll work pretty much with most bass. And this acts, you put one of these in the corner of a room or in the corners of the room, and it creates a surprisingly good attenuation of the bass sound, which means that these speakers sound more like real speakers and not booming along with the music, which is actually a function of the wall, the room. The other problem that you get is that any sound device, especially this, is going to propagate outwards. The sound is going to propagate outward, and the first thing it's going to do is it's going to hit a wall. Usually the side wall, sound bounces off the side wall and reflects back. Now, in many places, people don't really concern themselves with that, or maybe they put something like, we've got a CD rack there, it's far too far behind the speaker, but they'll put one equivalent to on the first reflection point of a loudspeaker. Now, you can usually find this by installing the loudspeaker and looking. I mean, the old way used to be running you sit in a hot seat and somebody walks a mirror up and down the side wall, and where you see the drive unit, that's where the first reflection of that drive unit exists. And that works effectively. We would suggest using something a bit more substantial than CDs. I know people use things like books and things like that, but again, probably diffuser panels work really well there. The other places that we have to look at is that when you think of a sound, the sound bounces around the room. So the first thing it does is hit the side walls. It hits the wall and the ceiling, then it bounces off the back wall, the front wall, or the front wall or the back wall, depending on which way you're looking. So in essence, if you're not careful, again, it's that point of having some kind of room treatment to control or mitigate some of those areas, some of those problems. Now, I believe you can go a little too far. Quite often, we try to get a sound that's studio dead, and if you go to a studio, they're actually not as dead as we think. There's a whole school of thought of saying, there's one school of studio design called LEDE, live end, dead end. The end where the loudspeakers are is pretty dead. You're listening to, so that there's a lot of absorption, there's a lot of diffusion and diffraction going on to prevent any sound apart from just what's coming out of the loudspeaker. Once you get to where the listener is, it's a little more live, because then you want to have that kind of separation and spatial qualities to the sound. I think there's a sense of balance to be had. We quite often, we advocate certainly putting bass traps or similar to this in the corners of the room where possible. Certainly at the corners behind the loudspeakers, but preferably all four corners. There's also a potential, which we have here in this room a little bit because the ceiling is a little low, of a strange effect called flutter echo, which is essentially what happens when a sound hits a wall and a ceiling and bounces off one another quite quickly, and it just has a little zing to the sound. Now, these can be corrected with some treatments either along the join between the wall and the ceiling. Again, not necessarily too much. You can go too over the top with this. You can also, if need be, put in a whole center panel along the top wall along the ceiling to try and cut out any first reflections that hit the ceiling as well. I think by the time you're at that point, sometimes that works in a listening room, but you're moving to a point where you're in a studio, and sometimes that can be you're pushing the limits of what you can do. And at that point, I think it's time to call in an acoustician. But what I've found surprising is just how much of a room you can get out of a relatively standard listening space, a standard living room, by using some judicious room treatment. Now, this is quite big and quite distinctive. These are in fact three separate panels, one just a pure bass trap, one with a diffusion panel. And that's quite a big box for some people. But on the other hand, the effects that this would have when put in the right places is quite significant, quite marked. But also what you probably can't see is that just behind me there is another one. That's a panel that stands half the height and is a little triangle that we stick in the corner of the room. There's one in each corner. Well, actually, there's three at the moment because my computer is resting on the fourth. We have them in freestanding, but often you can have them bolted to a wall, and they work exceptionally well. We typically use those 4 panels. We sometimes use side diffusion, not so much here because of the room has pretty good side diffusion anyway. But we also sometimes use a rear panel behind the head of the listener to try and break up the sound. And occasionally, if you're in a room that's really quite difficult, you might put panels just behind the loudspeaker to try and diffuse from there.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting because there are so many different positions, and it's difficult to establish exactly where, but it's a bit of trial and error, isn't it, as to where works best, and playing around with it.
Up to a point, yes. I mean, I think the better acoustics companies, the ones that are offering off the shelf as well as bespoke services, the ones that offer off the shelf systems tend to give you some guidelines as to where you should put things. So bass traps go in the corner of the rooms. That's a well-known fact within the audio business. And I think that's even diffused down, that's filtered down to most of our readers, most of our viewers. But it's worth saying again, it's one of those things that we quite often forget because we love the gear. We keep wanting to talk about different devices. We keep wanting to talk about great speakers like these and great electronics and great all these devices. And when it comes down to it, they're only as good as the room you're listening in. And things like this in the right place can transform the sound of a system.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, great. Well, thank you for that. What we'll do now is we'll take a quick break, and then we'll come back in a second. We'll talk about the various different designs that are available for room acoustic treatments.
Hello again.
Welcome back. So what I've wanted to talk about really, Alan, is we've talked about the concept and how room diffusers work. One thing I've noticed a lot in the last maybe 4 to 5 years, maybe that's a little bit generous, is that companies who make these products are actually realizing that they need to look good as well. There's a practicality to them, but actually it helps if they look good. As with the one you have there on your left, there's a nice shape and style to it, but it also still has a purpose.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been a couple of changes. I mean, this is a diffusion pattern which the company has made into a particular design. This is very much a sort of Art Deco design, but there are other options available. And I think once they started to model the shape of the diffusers, they could make them in more attractive forms rather than something that's a little bit more uniform or utilitarian. Similarly with these, I mean, these are standard black panels. You get black and cream and all sorts of things. But recently, again, a mark of technology is that you can now print an image over these, so that you can end up with something that's a cloth panel with sort of either a generic picture of guitars or whatever, or you can end up with quite a picture that you particularly love, so that you could have some artwork in there, which 10 years ago you could do that, but you would be looking and thinking, well, is that a guitar or is it a hamster? I can't really tell the difference apart. It looks awesome. And now they're much more sort of focused and sharp. And that's, again, a concept of the printing process that they've improved on in terms of printing onto cloth. There are also special panels, which we don't have here, which are wooden sort of block panels, which are I think they're called abfusers. No, I can't remember the name of whichever they are, but there's a specific type of computer controlled set of blocks that are very different, varying height, which act to break up sound very, very effectively. And those can now make quite attractive patterns. They used to look a little bit, again, they looked sort of quite you get sort of circles and things like that in the patterns, but just in the way that they were created. But they looked a bit sort of random, like somebody had an attack of Lego on their wall. But this is much more now. It's a more elegant solution to this, and I think we've got a few now where they're always going to be. I think one of the things we're always going to say is they're always going to be a certain thickness, because essentially what you've got in this is a diffusion panel. It has to be a certain level of thick. I mean, these things are about that thick. They have to be of a certain sort of size and volume just to be functional. Yes, you can put a cushion on a wall or something, but it'll do nothing. So these have to have a certain amount of material in them, and that takes up a physical space. But companies have become as good to get rid of that physicality as possible. Still going to be there. You're still going to have boxes that sit in the room. But recently, companies have come up with soffit ones where you can, if you're more into the idea, you can put them in the wall. So you can actually bury them into a wooden a partition wall, which works very effectively. And that means that they don't sit out by 6 or 7 inches or so. And those, they work very well as well. So there's a whole different ways that we can approach this. It doesn't have to look as brutal as they used to.
No, which is great, and particularly when they blend in. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding with the ones that you have to your left from GIK is that they're modular, aren't they?
Yes. Yeah, these are not only modular, but they can, these are 3 distinct panels. I can move them backwards and forwards. I can make them up in an intricate totem pole arrangement. And as long as I don't get them too unwieldy, usually I think they top out at about 3 panels. So they have a series of rails that mean that you can, not rails like I could push them around like a, they're not easy to move, fortunately, because you really don't want to have these falling over. But they are adjustable so that I can slightly, I'm not going to do too much of it, but you can move the things across so that you can end up with different panels in different shapes, which can look a bit better than just a square, a big rectangular monolith in the room.
Yeah, it just adds a little bit of je ne sais quoi, I suppose.
Yeah, a touch of celerity, yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, brilliant. Well, thank you for that. It's good to know. And we are reviewing those panels in a forthcoming issue, I believe.
Absolutely. These are the GIK Acoustics sound blocks, and they're coming up in our issue 211,
which is out at the beginning of September.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, well, thank you very much, Alan. Thank you for joining us again today, and we look forward to the next one.
Great stuff. Thanks, Ed. Bye-bye.